Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to AI 2030 show. My name is Xiaochen Zhang, the Executive Director of AI 2030 and CEO of Fintech for Good, and also the host of this show. Today we have Alex, who is a friend and also a colleague, and he has a great experience in responsible AI and in general, and as a very important person in AI in Chicago. And with that, I'd like to just have him to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Xiaochen. Great to be on your show today. Hey, everyone. Yeah, I'm Alex Castrounis. I'm founder and CEO of Y of AI, and also a professor of AI at Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management's MBAI program. And it's great to be here.
Awesome. And so you have been working on AI, you have been supporting different organizations to navigate AI space for a long, long time. And now that's, when we just move from the AI piece to responsible or trustworthy AI, and why, responsible AI and trustworthy AI is important for corporates.
Yeah, these terms are used often nowadays, which is a good thing that people are talking about responsible and trustworthy AI. But they're sort of they do a lot of work, if you will, right? So what is that exactly? What is responsible AI? What is trustworthy AI exactly? So I think the reason those kind of areas matter is like when you think of responsible AI, the idea, is that it's not just being responsible, it's like AI that's safe, something they call AI safety. So AI for good and not for harm. And then AI fairness. So AI that's fair, equal, equitable, and beneficial to all, and free of bias and discrimination, for example. And other things, right? Like that you could get into sort of explainable AI and transparency and all kinds of other areas. But the point mainly is that, when AI is being used and deployed hopefully for positive impact and benefits to not only just businesses and organizations, but also people, that it's done in a way that, again, is not harmful and it's not unfair and so on. On the trustworthy side, and that's a really interesting one, especially now with what we're seeing out there with all these large language models and now even LMMs or large multimodal models. And then, of course, you're hearing a lot about patterns like retrieval augmented generation or RAG. And so now these models are being deployed and sort of connected to knowledge bases where you can put a conversational interface on top of your own data, whether it's structured or unstructured data, and sort of ask questions or retrieve information or whatever you need to do in different use cases. But the thing is that people will only use things that they can trust, and the value of these tools is only as good as things you can trust. So if the output of these systems, these models, or these entire architectures or systems, like RAG systems, isn't trustworthy, it's not accurate, especially once you're adding actual data. So it's not just model parameters creating the output, which is where we saw hallucinations and so on before, which are for those of you less familiar, when a large language model just outputs nonsense or completely false information. In this case, you're actually connecting it to data and different kinds of information and sort of encoded knowledge, if you will. However, if what's returned is not from the actual knowledge base or is a misrepresentation of or something like that, you're not going to trust it, and therefore you're not going to use it.
Awesome. And maybe you can reflect, your interaction with the corporate and also in your interaction with the students in the classroom that do people really care about this topic? Because I think a lot of, after Gen AI becoming, a hot topic and naturally a lot of focus are or interest that is a given. So do they really care about responsible AI or trustworthy AI?
It's a great question, and I say the answer is it varies with who you're talking to and what organization and what people and so on. Some people are very passionate about it and do care very much about it, and like yourself and many of the people involved with the organizations that you are currently running. And there's organizations and companies out there as well that prioritize it and so on. I will say that, some people like myself and others were talking about responsible AI a long time ago. And sort of, it was sort of this whole thing where, people were concerned about things like algorithmic bias and, discrimination and all sorts of things like that. And so, there was like a conversation that was slowly picking up, and it started less of something you'd see in the real world with organizations really adopting responsible AI practices, let's say, and more like people starting to talk about it, people just raising awareness of some of these issues. But there was a lot of like sort of talking the talk and less of walking the walk, if that makes sense. Because one of the challenges with sort of quote unquote responsible AI is that how do you measure it, right? What are the metrics around it? How do you measure it? How do you test against it? How do you make sure that when you're building these systems that they are being built in a responsible way, and that the thing that you've built that you're going to now, sort of deploy to end users, is free of bias, is free of discrimination. It's fair, it's safe, it's all these things. And so I think there was a long time where, it was hard to walk the walk, partly because these kinds of frameworks, these benchmarks, these metrics didn't really exist yet. And therefore, a lot of companies, I think, were more waiting to see, okay, well, until there's regulations or something I need to comply to, or these things that I can measure, like I can understand it better and measure against it in a more effective way. It might not be the highest priority for some organizations, let's say. But fast forward a bit of time now, and we've got things like the NIST AI RMF, or Responsible AI Framework, Risk Management Framework, which is like, not only a really solid framework around, how do you build trustworthy and responsible AI systems, um, but it's even, sort of coming from NIST, which is, a US government organization, an agency that is predominant and well respected in the world of standards and so on. And so and then you have things like Rail or responsible AI licenses and some other things. So now I think people are have sort of the tools they need a little bit more than they did in the past, and are starting to try and either are already incorporating these things, and also testing for some of these potential issues in these systems, and reviewing their data for those kinds of embedded issues, or hopefully, over time we'll continue to adopt these practices more and more now that frameworks and things are available.
Yeah, you mentioned that different organization really at different phase in terms of exploration of responsible AI, trustworthy AI. And if an organization really are very determined, they want to get started, um, where do they start from, and how can they just get prepared? You mentioned about needs the framework. Is that a good starting point, or is more structural change need to happen to hiring or to establish? So how can they get started?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, NIST is a good place. Like starting to look at things like NIST, starting to look at things like the responsible AI licenses I talked about. I think under better, looking at least here in the U.S., there was a executive order that came out from the White House that talks about sort of a lot of different areas of AI and what needs to be sort of done and things that need to be addressed and so on. So sort of reading through some of those things and understanding what they're talking about, as well as like the AI Bill of Rights, which is another thing here in the US that came out. So just getting informed, and being aware of some of these things and reading them and looking at them is a good first step. The other thing is also, and this might be more for the people building the systems, but whenever you have AI models that you train and deploy, there's something usually called a performance metric associated with these models, right? So the standard one sort of before large language models was kind of that a lot of people think about as accuracy. So if you're thinking of predictive models, it's like, okay, does this thing predict accurately 85% of the time, 90% of the time, something like that? That's not bad. If you have a model that's predicting like 40% of the time accurately, that's not good. And therefore you wouldn't, put that kind of model in production that predicts very poorly, let's say. But there's other performance metrics like precision, recall, F1 score, and so on. But now with like, generative AI and natural language type models, there's different kinds of performance metrics. And so the question is, how do you measure? And again, it goes back to like, how do you benchmark and measure the output of these models and whether it's trustworthy, accurate, and so on. And so you get these new metrics like not new, but more specific to these kinds of systems and natural language systems that are like, rouge and blue and perplexity and toxicity and diversity and so on. So there's different ways to do this evaluation, essentially, is what it comes down to. And moderation as well, because you need to also make sure that the output of these models don't put out like hate speech or violent speech, stuff or whatever. So another piece of getting started is understanding like what does this moderation sort of layer look like, or how do you implement something like that on top of these generative AI and LLM based systems, and also how do you evaluate them for different things, as I mentioned, with those different kinds of metrics. And then there's benchmarks out there as well to sort of test certain models against some of these things. So awareness of all those different tools, information, and resources is one place. From the organizational perspective, yeah, that one's interesting because, number one, it depends on the size of the organization, right? The bigger the organization, if it's like an enterprise or Fortune, whatever, they're going to be more likely to have things like chief compliance officers, chief ethics officers, and a sort of an ethics advisory board, and chief AI officers, and so on. And then as you go down into smaller and smaller companies, you might not have these kinds of roles. And so the question really becomes who sort of owns AI, ML development in general at the organization, and with that, the responsible components as well, and sort of watching out for that stuff and making sure to employ and evaluate and moderate and these kind of components in the systems that are built.
Yeah, and just take enterprise as an example, and if a company just hired a chief AI officer, a chief responsible AI officer, and someone who really want to build out a team and to do AI responsibly or in a trustworthy way, what kind of expertise does this team should have? Should this team to have? And how technical, or do they need legal? Do they need compliance? Do they need ethics, social science, or in one team? Or what would be the better way to organize a responsible AI team within a corporate?
This is a good one. So that's excuse me. That's one of the interesting things about AI and machine learning, and data science in general, right? What the word science is in the name, at least with data science. So meaning it's scientific. In a lot of ways, this AI and machine learning type stuff is like more like R&D, right? It's not like building a mobile app. You just like, hey, you design a mobile app, you just build it, you QA it, deploy it, done, and there's not all that much to worry about. I mean, sure, there's some things you should keep an eye out for and so on, but like, more or less it's whatever. But with AI and machine learning, there's that performance metric that I was talking about, the accuracy, the trustworthiness, the safety, the fairness, all these other things, right? And on top of all that, as much as we want to simplify artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that's like a core part of what I do or try to do all the time, whether it's at Kellogg or whether it's with my business or partnerships or whatever I'm doing, a lot of it is trying to simplify AI and machine learning for like executives and so forth, decision makers, business leaders. And it's easier said than done because these are very complicated technical fields, and they're based in complex mathematics, statistics, computer science, algorithmic stuff, and so on. And not only that, some of the models, and this is where you get into conversations about interpretability, explainability, and so on, but some of the models are just, when you have models like a GPT-3 or GPT-4 or Claude or whatever that have like hundreds of billions, if not starting to get in the trillions of parameters, right? That are all part of the number crunching that goes on behind the scenes when you input a prompt and hit the enter button. And trying to understand what's happening under the hood with a trillion different numbers that are involved in computations gets very complicated, right? And plus, to really understand how they're doing what they're doing, it also means you kind of have to understand how transformer models work and encoders and decoders and all this sort of very technical stuff. So to your point about like who sort of thinks about the compliance piece or all this stuff and what kind of expertise do you need? It's a good question because on the one hand, if you're going to be compliant with something, that typically will mean there's a law, right? So until there's a regulation or a law, then you kind of don't have to be compliant in the sense of like you have your lawyers making absolute sure you're minimizing, if not fully mitigating your risk and liability with respect to a law. At the moment, we don't have AI laws per se. We're starting to have like sort of data privacy and security laws, a lot like GDPR that we're seeing around the country and like California and the US at least, and some other things around that with like even AI. So as more and more, if and as more and more AI regulation sort of comes out and gets passed, obviously that'll change things a bit in terms of how you comply with that stuff. On the other hand, when you think of things like SOC 2 compliance, right, which is sort of all about also data privacy and security. That's not a law per se, but it is a standard and a certificate. And so there are a lot of companies that are compliant with SOC 2, or maybe they're like HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant, things like that, and some of those are laws, but where they're not necessarily a law, but yet people won't really do business with you if you're not compliant with those standards. And therefore you invest in compliance with those standards, getting external auditors to come in and make sure you're doing things that way. So someone in the organization sort of owns that staying compliant and making sure you're updating your certificates and you're following the standards and best practices and that standard operating procedures and so on. And then on and interestingly with responsible AI, there's sort of some of that, but again, none of it. NIST is kind of known for standards, and so it's starting to get to where maybe there's that aspect of it, but not yet quite the sort of regulatory aspect where you might be yeah, needing to like comply with actual laws. Hopefully that answered your question. I think you're muted, Xiaochen. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. And you have another role, which is you are the EIR at 1871 AI Innovation Lab, and um, another part is that you're also a senior fellow at AI 2030, and then from AI 2030, we focus on responsible AI, AI for good, AI for all. And now that's have you seen any like AI for good type of use case application, especially coming from the upcoming cohort from the 1871 Innovation Lab? Any exciting startup coming out of that yet?
Yeah, I mean, we're still reviewing all the applications for this cohort coming up. So I wouldn't be able to speak to this cohort just yet, but I can say like generally there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening in the AI for good space. I'm really excited about things where AI is being used in healthcare situations to help. Like a lot of doctors and nurses and people that work in hospitals and so on are overworked and do a lot of administrative tasks and are understaffed and so on. So there's a lot of AI applications and trying to like assist them with that so that they can give patients more attention that they need and kind of deserve. There's a lot of AI type applications for non-invasive disease detection and more personalized and better treatments for illnesses and diseases, resulting in better health outcomes. There's a lot of work being done with AI in terms of creating more effective pharmaceuticals and drugs, much quicker to market and for less money, that are better able to address certain, again, illnesses and diseases. There's AI applications for helping people with disabilities, whether it's regarding hearing or vision related things, and then as well as excuse me, even environmental type stuff like reducing carbon emissions, AI applications in like ocean, marine sort of environments as well. Like I just read about a really interesting one where I think it's in Australia, maybe, but they have like, sort of microphones underneath the water that are listening. And apparently, healthy coral reefs make a certain sound, and then through patterns of sound, you can kind of tell when some events might be happening that could result in a reef sort of dying or something, getting very unhealthy, which could then have a pretty big impact on sort of the marine biodiversity and different things. So, looking at how to use AI for detecting those patterns and then making adjustments to things if possible for improved marine biodiversity and health and so on. So there's just so many really great applications of AI for good that unfortunately, I feel like aren't talked about as much sometimes as some of the more the less AI for good type stuff that a lot of people tend to focus a lot on.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is a rich conversation, although it's short, but we were able to cover quite a lot. And if people want to find you and or follow you, and what would be the best way that they can contact you?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to follow me and check me out on LinkedIn. Also, Why of AI, our company page, we do a lot of posting on things. So if you're looking to kind of keep up with sort of the latest topics and trends and things in AI, check that out as well. And I just want to say, Xiaochen, also with AI 2030, going back to your question about, what could be done with responsible AI, kudos to you and your initiatives and the work you're doing with that. It's very important that people are thinking about this more and, being parts of organizations like this that are putting forth actual, again, frameworks and, things that are actionable and usable and can be employed to make sure we build really positive impact type AI for good systems. So, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you, Alex. And yeah, so feel free to just reach out to Alex and follow Why of AI. And we definitely want to invite you back to continue the conversation. This is just a small part of a big iceberg, and we'll have a lot more to discuss in the future. So thank you for being on our show.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.